So hello, welcome. My name is Tiffany. I'm the owner of Tiffany Gordon Cosplay LLC, which is a company that focuses on costume and prop fabrication as well as education. And I have been cosplaying since 2008. First started off in high school doing it just for fun. Went to college, took a break because I didn't want to be influenced by anime anymore and do my own art stuff. Decided I'm bored of this, so let's get back into it and eventually turn this into a full-on company, and I do this as my full-on job and main source of income, and I'm very proud of that. This panel is going to be going over leather for beginners, and I have samples, so I'll try to pass them. Y'all can figure out how to cross the aisles, and then whoever's in the back, if you can just have a little pile of them and hand it back to me at the end, please. Specifically, when we get to my nice leather belt and my leather cape, I really want those back. And I do have business cards up here that you can get at the end, or if you want to leave early, that's fine too. You can grab it, whatnot. So, the pros and cons for it. The pros are it's really lightweight, and you can form it into any shape. And that means you can actually form it around like a gun for a holster. You can form it around a sword for a sheath. You can also use it as a substitute for fabric, and you can sew it. If you've seen any of my costumes before, specifically my Lilith one, that is my most recent one from Diablo, it is pretty much 100% leather. The whole dress, the corset, everything. It's wonderful. Downside, leather doesn't breathe when you wear it, so just be aware of that. It is really easy to transport as well because leather can fold up just like fabric, as long as it's not wet leather molded and it is stiff. Then you kind of have a little bit more difficulty with that. Leather can come in a wide variety of thicknesses. It can be soft or hard. It can be any color, any type of texture. It can come from a wide variety of critters. Also, downside, it's an animal product if you didn't know what leather was. So that is a con. Another con would be leather is extremely expensive. It is not a cheap hobby to get into, so just be aware going up front. There's also a lot of specific specialty tools that you will need for leather, but you can use a lot of them for EVA foam. You can go back and forth, so that's a good thing. It is not mistake friendly either, so if you punch a hole in it, that hole is there. It's not coming out. You can say it's a happy little hole, it's a battle damage, whatever you want, but you can't really get rid of it. And there is a bit of a high learning curve to it as well, and I always recommend for anybody that is a beginner to try and do sampling first before doing your full-on project, so you can mess up on that sample rather than your expensive hide. What can you do with leather? You can do just anything you want, really. I use it pretty much in every single costume that I make. I love working in all different types of materials, and pretty much every costume has either fabric, leather, EVA foam, a variety of it. So my Thor one that I'm going to be in tomorrow, it's all like leather belts and things, World of Warcraft stuff, full-on leather cape. The Mezzanine, technically it's a leather belt, leather strap here. Not a big thing, but I like leather. I've also done, if you are familiar with any of my Mercy costumes, every single one has leather in it. All of the skirts, all of the breastplates typically are all leather, as well as my Sacred Shield Charlotte costume from Final Fantasy. Full-on leather corset. It's just a wonderful material. So where can you buy leather? There's a couple of different options, and we'll say again, it is expensive. So the first place you can get it technically is Amazon, but I can't really recommend that because with leather, it is an animal product, which means every single hide is unique. Every single hide will have different textures, especially when you get to cow hides, where you will have actual branding marks on the hide. If you're buying on Amazon, you're getting a generic picture that represents the 500 that they have, and you don't know where that emblem is going to be on your hide. Also, just like people, leather is different sizes. So if you're buying a half hide, that half hide, the shape of it might be slightly thinner in one spot versus another spot. So I always recommend when buying actual hides to get it in person. Now, you can get tooling off Amazon and you can get any of the straps or leather thread, fine there. But last resort Amazon, also they upcharge it. Some places that you can also get it for small size leather, meaning like strips like this big, would be Michael's or Joann's. Again, it's not the best quality, but if you need something for just a small little belt, you can get it there. For a medium size hide, it's big. Hobby Lobby. They have fur there and they have small hides, but it's a wide variety, not the best quality. Now, my favorite place is Tandy Leather, which is a specific leather store. This is going to be your home. It is the Joann's of the leather world, where you walk in, it's just tables upon tables of leather, every single type that you want. You're gonna have all different thicknesses. They'll have all of the veg tan, which is the tan skin color kind, and all different thicknesses of that, different types of quality of it as well. You'll also have your alligator skins. You'll have your leather with flowers on it, your holographic leather, like whatever you want is there. Obviously, there's different uses for different ones, and you can be as much creative as you want. But that is the place that I recommend. And your most common leather types that you're going to get are your whole hide, which is, and we're going to talk about specifically cow hides with this. The whole hide is the whole cow. You're getting the whole thing. These are normally about that tall and that wide. And they're a little bit pricey depending on the quality and the color that you get. Quality for the more fine, nicer, non-ticked, marked leather pieces, that's going to be really expensive. For your generic stuff that, hey, it's got a little scratch, whatever, tends to be a little cheaper, and that's nice. They also have a sales table in the back, and that's where I get a lot because it saves some money. The other most common one is going to be your side, and that is the hide, but in half, and cuts the price in half. So what type of leather are there? Well, most common is your cowhide, and then some of the other ones I've worked with are pig hide. Pig hide tends to be a cheaper hide. The quality is not as good, and the hides are not like the large farm pigs, they're more of the smaller ones. And they're really good for sewing because they're soft. The other type of hide that I've worked with a lot is actually deer hide. It tends to be a lot more expensive. For instance, if you are familiar with my Ariel costume or Tyrael costume from Diablo, all of the white material is actually deer hide. And deer hide tends to be a lot more thin, it's easier to rip, and it's a lot easier to handle and work with because it is pretty much exactly like fabric in terms of cowhide, where it's a little bit thicker, harder to sew, but just depends. And our first sample, which I'll go this way and y'all can figure it out. So, what kind of tooling do you need? And I'm going to recommend tooling that is pretty much the most common tooling for, at least for me, for cosplay, for getting started. Like, you kind of have to have this stuff. So, for cutting, any type of tooling is going to probably cost you about $5. So, an X-Acto knife, you can cut thinner pieces of leather. For thicker pieces, you can use a box cutter. You can also use scissors, and they do create specific leather scissors, but just get a nice good pair of scissors and say that it's leather only, so it works out pretty well. Another thing that you will really need to get is for punching holes, and there's a few different options. So there are your leather hole punch, and it's pretty much like scissors, two pieces you squeeze together, and it has a wheel that rotates, and you have like 5 or 6 different options for holes, and all you do is click and it punches that hole out. Now that's pretty much used for like if you want to sew with it for doing lace up for corsets or something, or this you're going to be using for any types of grommets, rivets, or snaps for leather. The other thing that you're really going to want to get is a diamond hole punch, and I highly recommend getting the actual set. Your embroidery leather punch is going to be $15. The diamond hole punch set is around $50, where individual, like the diamond set comes with one stick and a bunch of different size heads with one punch up to 5 or 6 punches at once, and it makes it so you can hand stitch all of your leather pieces together. And that I highly recommend. If you buy each tool individually, it's going to cost you probably like $15 each, so you save more money. And then, of course, for doing the hole punch, you will also need a mallet. And I recommend either a rawhide mallet or a plastic mallet. You can get those at Harbor Freight or wherever, and those you can use throughout any of your other cosplay stuff. The hammer is going to probably cost you around, for specifically a rawhide or a plastic one, $20. If you are on a budget, you can also use a normal house hammer and a nail. And I have done that. It just takes a long time to individually hammer each hole. You will also need a just 2x4 wooden scrap block, because when you punch a hole, you don't want it going through your table, so you want it to kind of go through something else. That's the budget-friendly way. I still do this, but for starting off, if you want to wait to invest in the nice toolkit. With that rotary tool for punching those holes, I was talking about rivets, snaps, and grommets. These are the most common things for your leather. So a grommet is this, and that is where you use the hole punch, and then this grommet is basically used for doing corset sew-ups, or if you're doing any lace-up on any of your costumes for like a gauntlet or something. Very useful. Rivets are where there are 2 pieces that come together, and you're basically having a male piece with a female piece, and you hammer them together till they're flat. You can use this to, instead of sewing leather together, you can use it to attach the 2 pieces. You also can use that as a joint. So if you want your piece to bend with your leg, then you can do the rivets there, and the piece will actually move, kind of like an armadillo, if that makes sense. And so it's really useful for that type of application. And then for your snap, which is this, really nice and fun. It's so satisfying when you hand do these and it makes that actual clicking sound. It's a fun little thing. That is typically for connecting 2 separate pieces together, not one piece of leather like I have for our sample. All of these, you will need a specific set. And for these, you will need a rivet snap grommet set. And typically it's a pack where it comes with an anvil. It is flat and it has different size circle heads. And that is going to be for your snaps, where you put the head upside down so you can hammer all the pieces together. As well as it comes with around 4 to 5 different hammer-like pieces to put to basically connect all of the extra pieces together. Recommend the set because a lot of times it'll also come with all the rivet parts or all the grommet or all the snap parts. So you don't have to buy each of those separate. You can figure out with your little sample pack how to do it first and see, well, maybe you don't want more snaps because that's 4 separate pieces. And it's a little bit more of a higher skill level that I still mess up with quite a bit. And you can kind of figure out which one you want to use versus other ones. And then you can invest in different ones. I will say with all the snaps, grommets, and rivets, they come in different types of shines. So if you want a matte, if you want a shiny, glossy kind of metal look, if you want a bronze or a silver or a dark kind of patina, they have that all at Tandy. So once you figure out what you want, you can make it accurate for your cosplay. So I did mention also, you can sew leather, and you can do it with a sewing machine. So if you have a sewing machine, all you need is a leather sewing needle for your machine. And there is limitations because only certain types of leather you can actually sew with a machine unless you invest in an industrial or specific leather machine. Don't do that yet, just start off slow. And for that, You can sew for 2 pieces together, probably about up to 3 millimeters thick, but it depends on how stiff the leather is. Meaning, if it's like a paper thin, it's easy to move, you can sew that really easily. But if it is really stiff and harder to kind of move around, you're more likely to break a sewing needle for a machine. So the other option is to hand stitch, and that's the traditional leather sewing way. And don't invest in the special sewing kit thing that's like, they'll say, you should get this to start with. It doesn't work. Don't do it. You'll know it once they tell you. Don't do it. But for hand sewing, you will need, I recommend, all-purpose needles. You want to look for the needles that come in the pack that are the half moon. That's going to help you with sewing with leather. You also want leather, or the sewing needles to have a big eye hole, because the thread you're going to be using to sew leather is not your normal sewing machine thread. It's going to be wax thread, and this thread is thicker. Compared to like normal sewing machine thread, it's about 1 millimeter thick. And if you're getting the wax thread, it's also got wax on it. So it's a little bit more sticky. I will say, if you want to wear gloves, you can. I tend to, when I hand sew, actually use pliers to help pull it through the leather. For sewing leather, you will have to punch holes in advance. You can't just put the needle through unless it's like a deer hide or a pig hide, because those are a lot thinner. If you're going with cow hide, you do have to punch. And that's where the diamond hole bit, or if you want to use the rotary hole punch, you can use those. Your all-purpose needles are going to cost you around $5. Your wax thread is going to cost you about $4 to $10, depending on the type of thread, the color, and the size. You will also want to invest in EcoFlow leather weld adhesive. This is my favorite glue. I use it for fabric as well. This glue is going to cost you about $6, and it comes in a bottle that's about that tall. It's white. And the glue, when it dries, is actually soft. And that's why I use it on fabric. Sometimes I'll replace it instead of freight check, because it doesn't dry hard and crusty. It dries soft. And I have it actually on the back of this leather when we pass that around, so you can see where the glue is. And it dries pretty much clear, but it does have a tiny bit of a shine to it, so beware. But that's what it's going to cost you for those. Also, the leather sewing machine needle, it's going to cost you probably around $6, depending on the machine and the type that you want. Now to the fun part. So my favorite thing with leather, besides working with it, is actually coloring it. And I like to airbrush paint, but I'm going to talk about the traditional way first, because that's how I started, and I'll kind of get to how I'm doing it now. So with traditional leather dyes, you'll probably get this at Tandy, and most of them are going to be where they penetrate through your leather, meaning it's not going to be a surface dye, it's actually going to stain through the skin. And this is going to stay on your leather a lot longer, and it's, for the most part, a lot more authentic looking if you're doing like a Renaissance kind of costume. So the first leather piece that I started doing was my Lone Wolf Hanzo from Overwatch, and all of the leather pieces I dyed actually green, and they're really nice, good colors. With leather dyeing though, you will need a sealer as well, so it doesn't rub off, but it's kind of like a buff you put on and then you kind of buff it out. Really nice. For leather dyeing though, you will need wool daubers. They come in a pack of 10, and they're around $3. Basically, it's a metal wand with a circle little dandelion on top, and you use that for coloring your leather. You can also use sponges as well and kind of rotate it in. With the dyeing for any type of leather, you don't want to paint in strokes because you will have strokes. You want to actually rub on, rub off kind of thing. And this is going to give you the best results. It's going to look more realistic, and you won't have streaks like a paintbrush. And for doing your traditional dyes that penetrate, for these you do have to use veg tan hides, and that's the skin color ones. Obviously, if it's a black hide, you're not going to be able to color it unless it's airbrush painting. We'll get to that later. But with the veg tan, You can do any color that you want. You can also stamp it if you want to give extra textures to it, which is really cool. For this specific dye, I cannot pronounce it. It's like fitting, but yeah. And then the other one is EcoFlow, a leather dye, and those are the two that I use the most when I would do more traditional penetrating dyes. There is another type of dye that you will need if you want to do more vivid colors with leather dyes. And these are going to be surface dyes, meaning it is not going to penetrate through your leather. It is only going to sit on the top surface. And you can do it on non-veg tan, but your results are going to vary because you do have to apply it with coats. The downfall with this type of dye is you have to apply it in layers. If you only do one layer, then it is very thin, especially with whites. You can actually see the veg tan color of the hide underneath it. So I have these were when I was first doing samples for my Comet Medic Ziegler Mercy and trying to see how many coats I needed for each color. So some of them you don't need as many, some of them you need more. They do have metallics as well. The problem with that type of dye for surface dyes is you are applying the layers on top. So, just like EVA foam, if you bend, you get a crack, and it'll slowly start to chip off over time. So you do have to be really careful. I don't recommend that type of dye for parts that are going to bend. So if you're doing a breastplate and you do need to bend, probably not the best. Maybe you want to go towards the traditional dye. All the dyes at Tandy typically cost you around $6. I'm not going to recommend what sealer to go with it, because depending on the type of dye will depend on the type of sealer you need. As one of the Tandy Leather employees, they're always really helpful for matching you up with the type of leather that you're working with for what dye would be best and what sealer would be best for that one, and recommend that. Oh, and then, sorry, this is my Thor belt. It is all veg tan leather, and it is the traditional dye. One of the brown stain ones, not including, oh, no, I did the straps too, sorry. All of this was carved, so there's a design on the surface. Basically, I'm using I forget what type of tool it was, but it's specific for leather. It has like a triangle at the tip, and you just carve into it your design. So you can draw the design that you want in pencil, and then carve it out. You want to do this before dyeing though, specifically if you're doing any types of surface dyeing. But even if you're doing the traditional penetrating dyes, it might not dye all the way through for how deep you're going. So I always recommend if you're doing any type of texturing or any type of carving into your leather, do that first. Make the dye process the very last thing. And then for the other parts on here, I've got all of the rivets. They're just decorative. I have snaps on the back for closure, really nice. I'd rather do that than a lace up, especially if you're by yourself. You never want to lace up something by yourself. And then these parts are just 3D printed, so they're not actual leather stuff. But okay, and then the last part of dyeing, which since 2019 I've started doing on all of my leather, is I invested in an airbrush gun. And if you don't have an airbrush gun, start with the traditional stuff, and then you might find that you like airbrush painting if you do it with EVA foam and stuff. I highly recommend it. But that is really fun with painting on any of your leather. And that's where your color theory comes in. So with like airbrush painting, it's all about painting in layers. If you want a vibrant color, you want a light undercoat. So instead of doing a base white coat, it's your veg tan. So you kind of are replacing that, and you can get all these nice colors. Also, these samples are sewn, so you can kind of see. This is the deer hide. So it's the white deer hide with silver on the bottom and then black. This is a black hide with green on top of it, so you can kind of see more of the vibrant colors that you get. Just some of the other ones. I love this the most. I won't push it though, because it is a much bigger investment. So. And then for my favorite thing. is all leather. So this is my leather cape for my World of Warcraft costume, the Radiant Lightbringer armor set with the Permafrost cape and Ashbringer sword. Long name. So this is a variety of leather pieces. So all of the gold pieces were veg tan, so skin color type, and was airbrush painted with Createx Colors Gold. If you are going to airbrush paint leather, I highly recommend Createx Colors as the brand to use because their colors are the most vibrant. They're not going to chip on you for the leather, unlike some of the cheaper brands, so more of the automotive kind of ones tend to chip a little bit more. The blue color as well as the purple colors were all a cowhide also, but they were black. And for these, it's just a bunch of different layering of blues and then going into dark shadowing. On the purple part, there's gold swirls, and that's just hand painted. And you can hand paint leather too, so pretty nice. And then everything is machine stitched with a leather sewing needle for my normal brother's embroidery sewing machine. So just took some time, and then sewing in different parts. But you can see on the back, kind of. When it comes around, you can see the stitching. Stitching's okay on the back. This was, I think, my very first time sewing leather, so I was doing a lot of experimenting, figuring out what were the different settings, the best type of needles. This is my pride. I love this. But the colors are just so nice and vibrant. But yeah, that's with coloring. I'm not going to say pricing on airbrush paint and all that, because it's just another thing. My biggest advice if you get anything from this panel is to start with samples. Go to Tandy and get a starter kit. They have tooling starter kits, which I don't really recommend because they put a bunch of extra stuff. They're overpriced. You can get some stuff from Harbor Freight or from Amazon, but they have really nice leather kits. So to make a satchel or make a backpack, or they have like unicorn bags or something I saw. So anything that you want. Most of their kits are veg tan, and a lot of them are already pre-hole punch, and it's just you learning to sew, you learning to do the snaps. Sorry, can't talk. To start off with those kits, they're typically around $20, but be aware that they go up to like $500. So just be careful on what you're buying. But yeah, I missed that at the very beginning. Leather will cost you anywhere between $15 and $500. So it's been a bit pricey depending on the hide, the color, everything. Yeah, the kits from Tandy, best thing. They also have scrap boxes. And those, you can buy like $5 for a bag of just scraps. And it's a bunch of different colors, a bunch of different types of leather. That way you can practice with that, practice cutting, practice sewing, before you go and you invest in your nice hide that you're gonna make your costume out of. It's gonna be great, but don't mess up on that one, mess up on these so you can figure it out. But yeah, that's my biggest advice. So I started off with just like doing samples and just doing snaps, doing a gauntlet. So you have a flat piece of leather that you put 2 leather straps on. You learn to punch those 2 holes for each strap, and then you can learn how to put the belt buckle on it. So the actual buckle part, this one's just fake, but an actual functioning buckle. Something easy just to practice with the leather. You can also use that to do any simple coloring or dyes that you want. That's a pretty good starter one. So Joann's, they sell leather sewing machine needles in the same section that you would get normal ones. Tandy, I don't think has it because they want to sell you their leather sewing machine. The ones I have used don't have a specific setting for leather ones. The leather needle should be good for what you need if the hide is thin enough. If it's a thick hide, then you can't go through it. Always practice first, adjust so you know the top and the bottom part of the sewing needle. Practice with one piece of hide first, not with both of them together, so you can kind of see if it will even go through. Like the leather there, you'll see the thickness of the leathers that are going through. Some places were 3 thicknesses, but some of them are deer hide and they're less than 1 millimeter thick. So it's really easy to go through. Unlike the Thor belt that you had, that one's a lot thicker. If I was doing 2 layers of that, my machine would have trouble. And I would recommend for that doing hand punching and hand sewing. I don't typically care about that. They do sell specific like rub and buff kind of thing to help. Every time I've always used that, like if you have an expensive Coach purse or any other type of leather bag, they have specific leather care, but it makes the leather darker afterwards over time. You're oiling your leather pretty much. It'll help it last longer, but if you're doing any type of coloring, so airbrush colors or any type of the surface dyes, I wouldn't recommend it because it's gonna muddy it. Tandy leather. Make the trip to wherever you can find one. It is the fabric, like it's like Joann's, but leather only. All of the tooling, all everything. So. It depends on if you sealed your leather. Some of the leather sealing can make it a little bit water resistant. But if you have veg tan leather hide and you spill wine on it, you have wine on it. It's staining the skin of the leather. So unfortunate, but yeah, it just depends on the type of leather. Some of them are water resistant. If you have the holographic kind of leather, typically that's like you have leather and then they put kind of sticker on it for the most part, then that can rub off. But unfortunate, get wine on it. Just gotta be aware. Or, you know, it goes with your Renaissance outfit and you got a little drunk and it's perfect. It looks accurate. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming to my panel. I, again, professional costume prop fabricator, tons and tons of tutorials on YouTube. I have business cards if you feel free to take one. I'm also, I believe, going to my booth after this. Yes, so if you'd like to talk more, see some of my other costumes that I have made, you can go there. I do tons and tons of patterns on my website, so if you're interested in, like, I'll have patterns for the cape, for the hat, and the staff eventually, for my meeting up there. Go there, and yeah. Oh, and I have a workshop on Sunday for horn building for EVA folks, so sign up for that as well. But thank you guys!